look at what I scraped out of this piece. This is literally soot. Years and years, 250,000 miles of soot. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Boat Restoration by Ben. On today's episode, remember that rusty Duramax diesel that I bought? Well, I've gotten bored and I've decided to delete, tune, and upgrade the truck with, I think, are a couple key upgrades to make to these LLY Duramax diesels. So stay tuned, like and subscribe if you appreciate this content. And here we go, back to the work truck. A little bit different than boats, but we've got some cool things to show you. All right, guys, here we go. All right, so when I bought the truck, covered in rust. There's still rust in places that are unspeakable, but we're making do with what we have. Yes, it's a GMC. It's a 2004 and a half LLY Duramax, so it's got the 2 in the VIN number to designate an LLY versus an LB7. You'll notice that wasn't there before. Well, like I said, I got bored and started surfing the interwebs. Did all sorts of research on Duramax trucks. What's the best Duramax? Obviously, the LBZ Duramax is considered one of the best Duramax engines ever built. It had the most horsepower out of these first 3 engine series between LLY and then LBZ. The LBZ had like 365 horsepower from the factory. This truck only had 300. So anyway, there's all sorts of things that the LBZ did better than this LLY. But what's pretty cool is this LLY actually doesn't have too many differences from an LBZ. And there's all sorts of power here, reliable power, waiting to be unlocked without ruining or blowing up your engine. So Ben, of course, me, wanting to leave everything stock, drove the truck for a few months, and I'm finally tired of 300 stock horsepower. So that being said, what are a few upgrades that you can do to improve the horsepower on these LLY trucks and get them closer to an LBZ stock level, if not even a little bit past? So here are the things I'm going to do today and have already done that I would suggest for LLY Duramax trucks, not just 2500s. This can be 3500s, 4500s, 5500s, this top kicks, whatever this LLY engine went into. And as you may or may not know, these are Isuzu motors. So the Duramax was built in collaboration with Isuzu Motors, and it even says so on the computer that controls the engine itself. First thing I did when I bought the truck, you guys have already seen it, but is this intake horn here. You delete the factory intake horn to the turbocharger and get this larger, better flowing intake horn. It reduces the restriction on the intake side of the turbocharger, lowers overall engine temperatures, and gives you a little bit better performance. This was a $60 part on Amazon. I did not delete my oil PCV or oil carryover tubes into my turbo inlet. I will probably delete that with my EGR delete, but I'll get to that here in a second. So what that is my valve covers have a fitting that's then tied into this T that then goes to my turbocharger and then is sucked into the engine and basically eats any of those oil vapors that come out of the valve covers. So that was step 1. Turbo horn, turbo inlet, factory delete, which gets rid of that nice little Duramax, corrugated plate that says 6.6 on the top of it. Step 2, which you've already done, clean the heck out of your radiators. So get rid of any debris that's clogged in between your radiators here. You've got things as far as intercoolers, radiator, transmission cooler. I believe there may be even an oil cooler. I could be wrong. But yeah, this is also an overheat point on these trucks. So clean your radiators out, clean your heat exchangers out. That'll help you quite a bit, because they're not terrible. Guys just overlook it after years and years of service for these vehicles. People suggest a new intake. Nothing wrong with this intake. I replaced my filter with a better flowing filter, but overall fairly factory. This flows plenty of air for this motor. I'm not trying to make this a pulling truck or anything like that. So factory intake's fine. Factory map sensor location, all good. The next thing that I would suggest doing, and this is kind of where we get into the performance upgrade side of things. Tuner, of course, we'll get to the tuner in a second on what that does. And bear with me, guys. I'm going to talk through these things first, and then I'll show you the install for all of them. But what I've gone and done is there are a bunch of performance, really cool lift pumps out there in the world that you can buy. Now, me, as much as the next guy, would love to spend $700 on a fast diesel lift pump that flows 165 gallons per hour. But that's not always necessary. I'm not trying to push 700 horsepower out of my motor. At the end of the day, I just want to extend the life of my CP3 Bosch fuel pump. And I can accomplish that by adding an inline lift pump from my fuel tank to my engine. So I bought this 50 gallon per hour inline lift pump. It's 12 volt supply off of Amazon. Again, I'll put the link in the description. Bought a couple fittings, and it came with some hoses. The fittings were separate. I'll put the fittings in there as well. Typically, guys would install those fast diesel lift pumps around this section of the frame, or even up forward a little more, which would require dropping the fuel tank, finding some hoses for fuel lines that can tie into it, and then providing 12 volt power to that pump up to somewhere from my fuse box or batteries that would key on with ignition. I didn't want to do that. I'm going to make it simpler. Since I have this smaller 50 gallon per hour fuel pump, I can actually fit it up here in the engine bay. They suggest keeping these out of super hot areas, and by that I mean like right next to an exhaust pipe. The engine stays at 180 degrees while we're running. Those temperatures are fine, because if you'll notice, the factory fuel filter and fuel lines are literally right there on the block. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take my Evil Energy 50 gallon per minute lift pump. We're going to mount it right here on the firewall, and then with my two 90-degree fittings, I'm going to disconnect the inlet here, add a T, go up to my lift pump, roll over, and then back to my inlet here, and that will be sucking fuel directly from the fuel tank, bringing it to the fuel filter, taking it through the fuel filter, and then over to my CP3 fuel pump. So my fuel pump right now, that's on engine, is having to do all of the legwork currently to get fuel from the tank to the engine. This wears those pumps out, and over time, especially if you put more horsepower to these motors, will starve you of fuel. So we're going to get rid of that issue. We're going to make the fuel pump more healthy, not have to work as hard, and overall just get the fuel to the engine in a much easier fashion. This was only like a $60 setup here, and I'm going to take my 12 volt wiring, probably from my fuse box over there, something that's tied to ignition, and just tee that in a safe manner. I'll show that in the video as well. So the next thing from there, adding that lift pump, would be tuning the truck. Now, there are tons of options out there. In hindsight, I probably would have gone with a dash. Oh, I forget what they're called, but one of the new tuners that can just mount right to your dash, plug into your OBD2 port, and not worry about anything else. But Resourceful Ben actually went on to the internets again and looked up what was offered in like 2005, right after these motors came out, for tuning, and then continued to search and found tuners that guys have used on trucks that are obsolete for them because they've sold their truck, whatever it might be, and what was out there for the cheapest price. I found a couple Banks 6-gun diesel tuners for Duramaxes for like $300, $400 on Facebook. And then this bad boy for $75 popped up on Facebook, and I went ahead and bought it right away. And one of the first things you'll notice, hey, don't do that. My magnet on my GoPro just tried to snatch my fender that I've replaced and scratch it. But anyway, first thing you'll notice is that this is actually a 6-gun Banks diesel tuner. There are the part numbers for a 6.6 Duramax LBZ. Well, this is not an LBZ engine. This is an LLY. So, what the heck? Does this cause problems? What's going on? Will this make the truck an LBZ? Blah, blah, blah. No, actually, if you look up this tuner, this works for LLYs through LBZs. I bought this 6-gun Banks tuner. Wasn't sure if it was going to work. Plugged it in how the instructions showed me. Basically, there's 2 big harness plugs here that tee into the main engine harness connections from my computer to the engine itself, and then to the fueling system and to the turbo and all that, as well as my EGT valves and everything. But anyway, those tee in and plug in. They come back to the 6-gun tuner. It has a feed that goes over and tees into my map sensor on this side of the engine as well. So we have a map sensor tee that was ran across the engine, and then it has a quick hookup for a exhaust manifold and EGT thermocouple, so my exhaust gas temperature thermocouple, which I've ran down to the left side exhaust manifold on this truck. So this tuner needs that data to work properly, and then it goes in through the cab and plugs in nicely to right there. And they even say zip tie that bad boy so it doesn't slide out. So adding a tuner to the truck can be very good. Fuel economy, this adds about 100 horsepower to the stock tune of this truck. I've been running it on 6. It's been really smooth. I've definitely noticed a difference. And I'm getting better fuel mileage, so I'm not romping on this truck all the time. But the truck doesn't smoke black smoke anymore when I get on it. I'm getting better fuel mileage, and overall it just feels smoother. So I would say this Banks 6-gun tuner has done a good job. You can also buy these off of Banks' website still to this day. Nothing's changed with them. They've updated the software a couple times, but ultimately that's still a great option for these trucks. In addition, my truck is starting to surge at idle. So I'll be at like 600 RPM, and then it'll surge up to 900, and then go back down to 600, and it'll go whoom, whoom. You can kind of hear it ever so often. It like falls off and then shoots up. It gets worse when you put it in gear. What that is, and what I've looked up, it's telling me is my fuel regulating valve on the, or fuel pressure regulating valve on the CP3 fuel pump is going bad, or clogged up with a bunch of debris or particles. I need to get in there to replace that fuel pressure regulating valve. And I've actually gone ahead and bought the replacement for it, because typically when they go bad, you need to buy a replacement. There's a bunch of cheap options out there, but I elected to buy the GM OEM replacement for it. So here that is. Really simple part. 2 screws, 15 minutes. The problem that is in the way of this though, and you can kind of see where I'm going, is to get to that regulator, I have to get down in here. And the only way I can get down in here is by removing all of this. My air intake, turbo horn, more than likely, and my EGR recirculation. that this LLY engine actually came with. It came with exhaust gas recirculation, one of the first forms of emissions control on diesel engines. Recirculate exhaust gas from the back of the turbo back through a cooler and then into a throttle body valve that then inserted it back into the intake. And as you can imagine, and as many people have preached about, can cause a lot of problems in the older age of these engines, because they just get cooked with a bunch of black soot and buildup that occurs when you recirculate diesel exhaust. You can imagine the particles. After time, build up inside of the EGR system and then chokes the engine. It's really bad for the motor. So if I'm going to spend all this time to get at my CP3 fuel pressure regulating valve, you're sure as heck that I'm going to delete this truck at the same time. Well, holy heck, guys. I mean, I've watched some videos and they were bad, but oh my God, is that bad. Look, this is my finger. That is going inside my engine. This isn't even better. Like, oh my goodness. That's a bad EGR inlet pipe. So that's the old pipe. That'll be the new crossover pipe there. But let me just show you on the engine. That right there, that pipe is a cooler. And then, look at that. Literally, that's the valve right here on the end that then circulates exhaust gas back into the inlet. Pretty crazy. I mean, I didn't think it would be that bad, but just another reason. I mean, this is a first gen, you know, after treatment, right? LLY was one of the first trucks to get EGR. 245,000 miles, and that's what your EGR pipe will look like. So, right, wrong, and different, you know, I could clean it, put it back on the engine, it would still run fine, the truck runs great, but if I'm replacing that fuel pressure regulator valve, might as well get rid of this crap. Your diesel engine does not want to ingest sooty, gross, NOx-filled, particulate-filled exhaust gases. There we go for now. I've got the charge pipe back on, which is this guy right here. My air intake, I got my aftermarket turbo inlet horn back on, and then the crossover coolant feed for probably my heater core inside the cab connected, whereas before it went through the heat exchanger for the EGR recirc. But there you go. I mean, that is like a quarter to a third of an inch of carbon buildup, soot buildup inside the EGR valve. And then that was going into my charge pipe, my old charge pipe. Look at that. Crazy. So anyway, that's gone. EGR is gone. I did not do the pressure relief valve yet for the fuel pump, but I will do that next. By the way, if you're curious, the bottom side on that exhaust blocker plate are 12mm bolts. All right, real quick, guys. Today's video is brought to you by Steel Camel. This is a company out of Tampa, Florida that actually specializes in heavy-duty equipment and industrial anti-corrosion, lubricant, and anti-seize applications. They've actually sent me this awesome thread and post grease, red grease lubricant, great for battery terminals, bolts, connectors, as well as this spray-on special formula corrosion inhibitor and lubricant. Great for electrical contacts, hardware, lighting, multi-pin connectors. Not only heavy-duty equipment, standard automotive equipment, as well as marine corrosion, anti-corrosion applications. You can see here all sorts of different applications for these products. We've got a grease, thread and post, as well as a spray-on lubricator, anti-corrosion, good for under 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Check them out, Steel Camel. Thank you guys for sending me your product. I will be sure to be using this in all of my boat restoration by Ben applications. You can never go wrong with a good anti-corrosion or corrosion prohibitor, as well as a lubricant for any hardware application. So thank you, Steel Camel, for sponsoring this video. Now we'll get back to the content. I'm going to show you guys something wild. So I am removing all of the piping that leads to my turbo inlet and then Y pipe in the middle of the two cylinder heads here, so I can get to my fuel pressure regulator, because I got to change that out. So that requires moving this coolant housing and tube crossover, so we can expose that, and then my fuel pressure regulator is literally right here. So now I got access to it, it's exposed. I can pull this wiring harness plug off and then change that out, so then my Lopi idle will go away. But let me show you something. So if you look down there, that is the inlet to my cylinder head. So basically my intake manifold, which after the intake air goes through the turbocharger, through the intercooler, and then down the charge pipe and into the intake manifold. It used to have this EGR set like this. So this downpipe goes into my intake manifold. Well, prior to that, we had our EGR here. So directly from our exhaust, and went through this heat exchanger, which was liquid cooled by coolant, and then to this valve body, which went to the old crossover pipe, and then down to our intake pipe here. Well, I literally pulled this off. Like you can see, it's just coked in nasty gook, which came from here. That's all soot from our exhaust. This is our EGR. We got rid of that, replaced it with that through pipe there, which is a very cheap aftermarket kit. Got rid of the EGR valve and heat exchanger. Look at what I scraped out of this piece. This is literally soot. Years and years, 250,000 miles of soot that I scraped out of my charge pipe. And over time, obviously, this stuff would break off the walls and get sucked right into the engine. That is insane, guys. Now, granted, these systems, they are maintenance items. You're supposed to clean them. But even better than that, if you can, get rid of them. So anyway, we're here. I'm going to clean all those pipes up. While we're at it, I'll pull the fuel pressure regulator out, which is right here. So we'll replace our fuel pressure regulator and hopefully correct the surging that I've been having with my truck, as well as the fueling issues that I've been having with my fuel pressure system. Well, I'm sure there's all sorts of you guys that want to say, I told you so. Don't buy a truck with 245,000 miles from Massachusetts. And you know what? I absolutely agree with you. Don't do that. I should never have bought this truck because it has way too much rust. I mean, literally look at this. The hood has rust everywhere. Every time I open it, a new piece of rust falls off. And not to mention, as I was starting to talk about last night, I've got the fuel pressure regulator out, and down in the valley between, look at all that, that's like gunk and soot and oil and dirt all below the CP3 fuel injection pump. So I actually grabbed my shop vac, and we're going to shop vac out all of that stuff. This has been a fun budget project. I've learned quite a bit working on this truck. However, I'm probably going to sell this in the next few months and get into a 2015 or newer, either Cummins or LML Duramax. So we'll see. You know, one of you should buy this truck. It's actually a good running truck. I'm doing all the right fixes to it to make sure it runs properly. But I'm gonna lose money and time on this thing. It is what it is. It was a good experiment, you know, trial and tribulation, learning from my mistakes. But at the end of the day, in the spirit of YouTube discovery and sharing and teaching my viewers, learn from my mistakes. Anyway, I'm gonna get into vacuuming all this gunk out, and then I ordered the wrong fuel pressure regulator. I ordered the CP4 regulator. This is the CP3 regulator. CP4 is a little bit bigger end, only 2 prongs that hold it on, and then a pretty substantial like particulate filter. So anyway, that's in the mail. It'll be here tomorrow. So hopefully that fixes my fuel surge issue. In the meantime, I ordered a different fuel pump that'll mount on that housing, so that'll help with my loss of fuel pressure issue. All sorts of fun stuff. The sound of things that came out of here was quite disturbing. If you look down there, there's literally like seeds and stuff. Insulation, seeds, all sorts of crazy stuff out from the valley between my cylinder heads, and there's still stuff down there I need to get. I mean, I'm gonna open up this trash can. Look at that. That all came from between my valley, and it's just soaked with nastiness, coolant, oil, whatever it might be. Good Lord. And while I'm at it, this Y-bridge intake has 2 O-rings on it, and these are a little hard and flattened, so I went ahead and bought a kit so I can replace those 2 O-rings before I put this pipe back on. And then same thing with this O-ring that goes to this coolant housing here. On this pipe there's an O-ring, so I'll pull this off and replace that O-ring as well, so that way when we put it all back together, there's no leaks or problems on that end. So while I wait for parts, finish doing my cleanup, and move on. Another reason to have a tailgate in a truck bed. I can put all my parts laid out nicely. Obviously not going to reuse that or that, but got both my coolant pipe, Y-bridge intake pipe, crossover, charge pipe, turbo, intake horn, all laid across the back. And then over here, as I'm prepping to add my lift pump, I disconnected my inlet hose there, added my T to the feed hose to the pump, and this will be the return. I've got extra length right now until I cut it, but that'll mount right here. So I'll have a little lift pump, priming the fuel filter, and then I'll probably have to do a lot of priming to get the fuel system on this thing back up and going, because I've introduced a lot of air. All right, here you go. There's the old one, there's the new one. About a $60 part if you buy the Bosch. And then my new gaskets for my intake Y-bridge plenum and coolant crossover pipe. So we're gonna throw this bad boy right back in here where it goes on the back side of the CP3, bolt it back up, and then start putting all of my pipes and hoses and tubes and wires all back together. took a second. But that is a tough fuel pressure regulator to put in. It's in a tight spot. It's not easy to get the Torx, I think it's T25, bits in there with a wrench to tighten it down. But oh my gosh, I mean, if you did not remove all this piping, you'd never be able to get to that fuel pressure regulator. But our new one's in, old one's out. I really hope that fixed the issue. Probably worn out. I'm assuming this is just a standard like solenoid, but probably worn out spring or you know, contacts inside this thing from being 250,000 miles old. But now that I've got that piece in, throw all the piping back on, button up all the hoses, and then I have a new fuel pump to add. This side of things is all buttoned up. I have all of our pipes back on. Intake, intake horn, Y pipe connection, charge pipe adapter, EGR delete pipe, CAN bus main wiring harness connections rehooked back up, mounting bracket hardware back in, coolant bypass, which I think is for the heater core. Back in, that could be for something else, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, this is screwed back into the coolant pipe, which crosses over to our two thermostat housings. Those are back in. Main, radiator, hose reconnected, wiring harness bundles put back in place. We've got our EGR pipe secured and the Y pipe connection into the Y pipe. Well, I am all finished up, guys. We've got everything installed, hooked up, including our fuel pump. Get this hood popped here. Key in the ignition. You'll hear the fuel pump kick on. There she goes. A little cold. It's about 45 degrees out right now. Fires right up. Fuel pump coming away. No leaks. I replaced my O-rings on my pump. That is solid as can be now that I have this lift pump in. That's about a 30 gallon per hour lift pump. Smooth as ever. The truck is good to go. No more lopey idle. Nice consistent exhaust note. She's been running good. So I'm all said and done with this. No more upgrades. I may pull the tuner off because I don't really need it. See how she runs without it. She's been burning really clean. And all in all, this is a nice truck, guys. So I'm gonna list it for sale. move on to something a little more new and reliable. It was a great project for me. You guys, all new suspension, cab mounts, every wheel, rotor, tire, hub replaced, fixed up, fluid film, the whole frame. And then it has some rust. It's pretty significant on the back part of the frame here where it's at the end of the bed. So that's the worst part of the whole truck. Everything else seems to be in pretty decent shape. Interior, pretty clean. No tears in the seats. A little bit of wear from the driver's side over here, but you've got all your electrical seats, heated seats that work half the time, updated stereo, 245,903 miles, engine lights on from EGR codes because EGR is deleted. I can show you that. Nice Bose stereo system. Good back seat, looks like it's never been used hardly. Brand new carpet inside. GMC 2500 HD SLT. Does not come with the toolbox. Even got this nice plastic bed liner. So anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for watching. As always, like and subscribe to the channel. And we're moving on back to boat restoration projects. All right, we'll see you later, guys.